Forgive me, that's so, well, blown out by the bright sun. I didn't pick dark enough colors. So did you like that song? Did you see the spiritual message in it? Chris, would you put the words up for me? How rich I am since Jesus came my way. Now, what does that mean? Jesus, not the man, but is a metaphor, a symbol for what? Christ in you. So, how rich I am as I've come into my awareness of the Christ within me, my oneness with the source. Redeemed my soul. What's your soul? Your consciousness. That's where you live. And in that consciousness, you have certain attitudes about your worth, about your supply. To redeem it. Well, Paul said, and I was going to quote this later, I will do it again anyway, I suppose. Be ye transformed by the renewing of your mind. Isn't that what redeemed my soul is? Your consciousness, your mind, your thinking and feeling renewed. Filled with truth as opposed to all of the foolish ideas we have about life and lack in life. Redeemed my soul and turned my night to day. Well, it's not going to make the sun fail to come up in the middle at midnight unless you're in certain parts of the world. But what's going to happen is what looks so dark and impossible, and the dark night of the soul is going to turn into the light of spiritual understanding, where you see things differently. And when you see things differently, there's an old expression. I just ran into it in one of the old-time Unity writers. She re-spoke it, rewrote it. What thou seest, that thou beest. What you behold yourself to be is what you're going to experience. How very rich I am. That's an affirmation. But more than that, is it not the truth about you? How very rich I am. Just imagine if you had to buy your next breath. What's it worth to you? 10 cents? $1? $100? I would say probably priceless. Do you ever have to worry about it? For the sun to come up, all the water, all people who have lived on this planet or will ever live on this planet is already on this planet. Is it not? All the air people will ever breathe is on this planet, isn't it? Abundance has been supplied. The Bible puts it very simply. Consider the lilies of the field, how they toil not, neither do they sow. Just spin. That's the other part of sowing. Spin. We spin our wheels trying to make things happen, trying to get our good at whose ever expense, thinking there's only so much. That's a great prosperity song. And I suggest it's not a bad thing to hold on to that affirmation. How rich I am. I like that. Catherine Ponder, our one who's been for a generation, one of our most famous, I believe, prosperity teachers, I think she'd approve of that. And certainly would Dr. Sue Sicking, who once stated, "In my father's pants are many pockets filled with good for me." And that's the truth. God may not be wearing pants as we know them, but He already has and has created the abundance to meet each day's need. I went out in the other room, out in the hall actually, and look what I got. It's a small panoramic egg, but the ones I used to get were the size of ostrich eggs. It was a different era. This one, I think, Sue, didn't I find this in Hallmark? I think bought it on sale after Easter one year. You can't see inside, but there's a cute little yellow baby chick. It's sort of an image of us. The outer shell, physicality, but inside, there's a child of God, creature of life and light and beauty and goodness. And we can look inside and find it if we but look. Even as a kid, I really loved these things. Well, I decided after everything we've been doing, it's been a long time since I talked about prosperity, and I think probably it's a good idea. As I began thinking about prosperity, a lot of things come to me, and one of them was the 4 basic forms of our human expression comes through thinking, speaking, seeing, and doing. So this week, we're going to look at building prosperity through thinking. Thinking. Charles Fillmore, same thing, if you'll excuse. Charles Fillmore stated that thought was formative. Emily Cady talked about the formative power of thought. Emma Curtis Hopkins taught many people, including the Fillmores, about the formative power of thought, and how often we think of thoughts as just throwaways. Oh, it was just a thought. Never just a thought. Every thought is formative. And we build the whole structure of our existence on what? What we think. It is the predecessor of everything we do, everything we create. First is a thought. And it's so easy to dismiss thoughts instead of realizing that every thought is a channel through which we express ourselves and live our lives, conduct our lives. We form and shape the very substance of our lives, thought by thought by thought. Now, as we study truth, I think it's important that we realize that these 4 forms, thinking, speaking, seeing, doing, these 4 forms of expression become the foundation stones upon which we build our lives. We build the experiences day by day. So it's important to realize peace, happiness, success, and prosperity comes by using the formative power of thought in a constructive, positive, Christ-centered way. You know, if you look back over your life, as I periodically do, and right now there are things moving through my mind about my life the last however many years it's been. Charles Fillmore said, "My age is none of my business." I realize how many things came about that I look back and think, wow, blessing after blessing. Oh, challenges too, absolutely. But blessings after blessing. Some of the people who have come through my life, I don't know how they got there, except I do know that there was something within me that drew them to me. Something that brought us together for a purpose. When I go back think about going back to the years in Cincinnati, in the early 70s, when I got a telephone call to substitute for a church organist, a friend of mine, he wanted to take some weeks off, and turns out he was the organist for E.V. Ingraham. Ingy, as many old-timers know him. Ingy was here at headquarters with Charles Fillmore. It started back around 1910. 1930, he was teaching in the field licensing department, in the ministerial education program. He taught such people as Ellie Meyer. Some of you remember Ellie Meyer, who was minister first here and then at the Temple on the Plaza. Ellie Meyer was a student of Ingy's. I remember sitting there at the organ listening to Ingy speak, and at that point in his life, he was practically blind. But in the area before we came into the sanctuary to start the service, I would meet Ingy and his wife back there, and as soon as I came in the door, "Hi, Greg," he knew. And his notes were in black crayon, much like Charles Fillmore did, and huge letters, and if he needed to refer to a note, he'd get it really close. But what a teacher of truth. Many times I thought, my goodness, what did I do to get to meet this guy? To know this guy and love this guy. And there have been many opportunities over the years. In Las Vegas, after the group I was playing with, we did an appearance on the Jerry Lewis Telethon. And we used to do that every year at the Sahara, where we were treated like kings. We had a room in the Sahara for a dressing room, changing room, but then when you got backstage, you were within security, and there was an area with food 24 hours. When you got to the green room right before you went out on stage, they had hairdressers, they had an open bar. Oh, it was heaven. Yeah. I remember going in and having my hair kind of styled. It was pretty amazing to have those kind of experiences. But by the time we left Las Vegas, we had been in Canada, spent a month in Winnipeg, and then went down to Las Vegas. It sort of been a while since I'd been home, and by the time we were ready to leave Las Vegas the last day or so, I was out of money. And the last dollar I had, there was a place on the old strip downtown called the Orbit, where you could have 99-cent steak and eggs. And the drummer and I went to the Orbit. It was just a couple of blocks from our hotel. And that was the last bit of money that I had paying for that. And I had done a little praying about that on the way. And as Tony and I crossed the street, I stepped out into the street. I stepped right on a $20 bill. What do you say when you do that? Well, I hope you don't say, "Oh, darn it." Thank you, God. Right out of heaven. It's amazing the things that come to us. If we believe. And folks, in my life, I look back and I see these times where everything has worked for good. Absolutely. I'm glad I found unity back in 1966 and met that strange lady that became my best friend for a lot of years, up until she passed in 2000 and, do you remember? 2009, 10, something like that. Sue got to meet her. She was secretary to the Unity minister in Cincinnati, and she was the first one who said, "Have you ever tried Unity?" Well, big mistake. Brought me to this point in time and space, you understand. Yeah. And taught me how to pray, and taught me how to think. And I can't say that my parents taught me how to think. They taught me some things to think. School taught me things to think, and I'm going to tell you a lot of them were wrong or produced what I didn't want. Thinking, how important it is. Thank goodness I came to Unity and learned about the formative power of thought. See, life is not a matter of chance, but of law, principle. And by thinking, by speaking, by seeing, and doing according to law, that's how we build a life. Like a house built on a rock. You remember Jesus in the story of the house built on a rock versus the house built on sand. Well, I built on sand long enough. And thank goodness somebody showed me that there was such a thing as a firm foundation. That first foundation stone of building a prosperous, happy, successful life is in right thinking. Now, as I've said, basic principle in Unity is this formative power of thought. Thought is an active force. There's no such thing as just a thought. It's the stuff, every thought is the stuff of which our lives are made. The material that forms and shapes our world. And each one of us is living in a slightly different world of experiences, of supply. Our material world, this world we're experiencing, conforms to the pattern we give it by the thoughts we hold. Now, life can be constructive or destructive based on the thoughts that we think about ourselves, our relationship to God, our good. But I realize what to human beings is the truth. It's really somebody else's fault, right? I'd like to blame my parents. I'd like to blame my school. Could I blame you? Is that okay? Because don't we want to blame something outside for what happens in our lives rather than looking within? Charles Fillmore said, for every condition in our lives, we can trace it back to a thought. And let me expand that to a pattern of thinking. We may have several different thoughts that pass through our minds about our worth, about how limited the good stuff in life is. Altogether, it forms a pattern of lack in our lives. And it's easier to blame other people for it, but that doesn't change the reality. And the reality is, what we think, we become. What we think, we become. And that can be a real hard lesson, folks. But here's the other good side of that. If we create it, Charles Fillmore made this statement too. What one thought made, another thought can unmake or remake. So we have the ability to change our thinking. What happens when you change your thinking? Then you're going to change your experience. How much of our lives have we spent trying to change people, trying to change situations out here instead of inside ourselves, instead of going inside the egg and looking in there and saying, oh, wait a minute. If I don't want to experience such and such, then I need to stop holding this thought or this attitude or this concept about my life, about myself, about my worth, about how much good there is in this world. There's a principle. We find it in Proverbs 23, verse 7. And here I've used the King James Version because Revised Standard kind of twists this a little bit, and another version has it in slightly different form. So the most recognizable is the King James. For as he thinketh, or some have said, as a man thinketh in his heart, so is he. And one of the other translations says, as he thinketh within himself. So, in the depths of your being, what do you think about you? About good? About abundance? About your supply? Do you think there's enough? Or do you have those thoughts and an attitude of lack in your life? As we think within ourselves, so we are. So we experience. So this is a law that if we get this principle and we remember this principle, and to remember it occasionally is not enough. One time a day to think, oh, wait a minute. What I think within myself is what I'm going to experience. Well, that's a nice thing. At least once a day is something, but it's not enough. One Unity teacher said, all the time. Reminding yourself constantly, all the time. Because when we become complacent, where do you go? Right back into the habits, into the rut in the middle of the road. We don't have those so much anymore. What we do have, we call potholes. But I remembered when I was a kid going to my great aunt's farm and riding in my Uncle George's Model A, gray, with red pinstriping. Oh, it was lovely. And they lived on a gravel road out in the country. A car would go by, maybe 2-3 times a day. and the dust cloud. Then the county would come along and lay down some oil. Sometimes before they put new gravel down, and after there were lots of periods of rain, you'd get big ruts in the road. And those little wheels on that Model A, they'd get stuck in some of those, and Uncle George would have to wait for a particular spot where he could kind of rest the wheel to one direction and jump out of the rut. Eric Butterworth used to tell a tale about this frog hopping down the side of the road. It was a dirt road and it was full of ruts, and as he was hopping down the side of the road, I'm not going to hop like a frog, but he heard something. Kind of seems like this little sound of something coming down the road. So he looked, and he could hear it coming. He couldn't see it. So he got closer, and there, when he looked down into the rut, there was a small frog. And he said, "Ribbit." I guess they always start with ribbit. "What are you doing down there?" "Well, I fell into this rut, and I can't get out." "Have you tried?" "Yeah, I can't get out." "Well, what are you going to do?" "Well, I guess I have to stay here." The frog he stopped someplace along the road for lunch. Yeah. And later, hopping down, he overcame a little frog by the side of the road. And he said, "Little frog, I saw you before." "Yes." "Well, you were down in that rut." "Yes." "And you said you couldn't get out." "Yes." "Well, what happened?" "Well, I had to get out." "Well, what brought that about?" "A wagon came along." That gives a little bit of motivation to make the change. Sometimes we need to be motivated to make a change in our lives. What's the principle? As you think within yourself, so you are. What do you think about your prosperity? About the abundance in the universe? Remember, this law works immutably. It works all the time, impersonally, the same way, and what it means is thought comes first, the experience follows. So, good news is, if that's how it works, then all you have to do is control your thinking. Well, that's a good thing. Well, wait a minute. How do I control my thinking? Well, in Unity, we teach you have two tools to control thought: denial and affirmation, right? You've heard this over and over again. Denial. Reminding yourself that the error belief, the erroneous thoughts, the stray thoughts that you don't want to hold, you need to say to them, "No, this is not the truth about me. No, this is not what I choose to believe." Something comes up about lack in the world and in your life. No, there is no lack in my life, in this world, in the universe. And that's true. If you look out at night, what do you see? And go out in the desert, as we were coming down into Las Vegas, and it would often come in evening and come out over the dam and down into the top of the mountain, looking down into the valley. You'd see the lights of Las Vegas there. But in the sky, the light was brilliant of the stars, the Milky Way. There's no image of lack there. There is abundant energy in this universe, and it's there to meet your every need. So you remove, you stop the thought right then. But then, in our lives, if we stop one thought and we don't choose what we're going to put in its place, it kind of reminds me of 7 devils that come flying in that are even worse than the first one. So, as you deny something that is not true, something that does not create what you want, you replace it with something that is true, a reminder. And I think, and it's just my opinion, but I think God and man, heaven and earth, and all the power within me join together to prosper me. I think that's a good thought, don't you? Now, affirmations. Charles Fillmore, I remember reading a story, hearing one of the old-timers wrote about Charles, and that Charles Fillmore said in passing through the halls in the administration building next door, "I have affirmed 1,000 times today." Oh? Did you get up to 5 or 6? Maybe 10 times? He affirmed until it was planted, till he made a firm place, a firmament in consciousness. Planted the idea and the thought till it became the habit. Now, affirmations, sometimes we just say affirmations and say affirmations, but affirmations are just like recipes. You've ever worked with a recipe, right? Do you just read the thing? What happens if you just read the recipe? You're never going to taste it. You're never going to experience. And if you're planning on having it for dinner, you're going to starve. If you think of an affirmation like a recipe, you have to. A recipe has certain elements. You gather the elements. You weigh them or measure them. You put them in a container and you blend them together in some form. And then you bake it, you cook it in some way, right? God and man. Well, there's your flour. So you look at just that part, God and man. What does that mean to me? It's the creator and the created. It's the infinite, but it's also me. We work together. I'm a co-creator with God. Heaven and earth, the realm of spirit, the realm of heaven, the realm of divine mind, and of manifestation or expression right here. They are working with me. And all the power within me, all the 12 divine faculties, all of the faculties within us are working together. God, you, the power of and ideas in divine mind, and this realm of physicality, all working together, joined together to prosper you. But you have to lay hold of these elements and have them become, well, use the word realize. And to realize is for them to become real to you, to understand them. So just like doing a recipe, you look at the elements and you measure them out in your mind. When you measure them, you test them, you see how they work, and you put them together with thoughtfulness, investing your own energy in mixing it in your consciousness. That's your bowl. And then you put it in the oven. That's allowing it to rest within you in the heat of your faith. And you hold to that. And what happens? 20 minutes, 30 minutes, hour and a half, however long it takes, what happens? Well, you start to get, I smell something good. Remember when you sold your house, didn't you put out some cinnamon-scented candles or baked bread or cookies? So people walk in, ooh, it smells good in here. Yeah, and you start to realize it's coming. It's just about time to eat. You take it out of the oven. And what's this business about letting things rest? Shoot. As soon as it's out of the oven, it's yours. It's coming into expression in your life. If we were helpless victims, we'd be hopeless. But we're not hopeless because there's a principle. As a man thinketh in his heart, so is he. As I said earlier, Paul said, be ye transformed by the renewal of your mind. So begin now, this week, realizing the power of your thought. There's no such thing as just a thought. And start now really thinking about prosperity. And work with this, God and man, heaven and earth, and all the power within me, join together to prosper me. And work with that recipe till you've put it together in your own consciousness. And you will see it in your world.